At first, it was not much to look at, but as it grew, fueled by its owner's ego and fantasies, the structure became a touchstone of the gold rush. It was the largest and best fortified fort in California, and ultimately a decaying symbol of the excesses of the age. It was Sutter's Fort in Sacramento. John Sutter's story is an oft-told tale of escape, reinvention, caddish behavior, abandonment, and loss. His world was built on personal charm, self-aggrandizement, broken promises, and an economic house of cards fashioned from delayed payments and massive debt. On August 1, 1839, Sutter's journey to his new home in the Sacramento Valley began. Johann August Sutter, commonly referred to as John, had beguiled the Mexican governor Juan Bautista Alvarado into a land grant of nearly 50,000 acres in the interior of northern or Alta California. Additionally, in association with other regional land barons, Sutter had commercial access to nearly 150,000 acres. Now, Sutter was sailing through the interior river maze, searching for a stronghold for his self-styled empire of New Helvetia, named after his homeland of Helvetia, or Switzerland. On board his boat, the Isabel, was the initial party of settlers. There was Sutter, 3 German carpenters, 2 mechanics, the ship's captain, and several sailors, and Sutter's 8 Kanakas, or Hawaiian laborers, employed by Sutter under contract with Hawaiian royalty and the governor of Honolulu. After several days sailing, Sutter, theatrical to a fault, literally announced his arrival in the valley with a bang by firing a cannon. Eyewitnesses noted that the blast startled flocks of waterfowl and started a small stampede of tule elk. Following his arrival at the place that would become known as Sacramento City, Sutter spent several days charting the land before selecting a knoll situated well back from both the Sacramento and American rivers for his colony. Construction began immediately. The first structures were unimposing but functional. William Wiggins, a 23-year-old visitor to New Helvetia in 1840, described John Sutter's residence as merely, quote, a one-story adobe with 3 rooms, unquote. But Sutter was the undisputed master. Wiggins recalled that Sutter, quote, kept upon his table a brace of pistols, and he would allow the wild Indians to come into his room by the scores, oftentimes being entirely alone, unquote. But, as Wiggins noted, the natives were well aware that any offenses, quote, would be punished by death, unquote. The pistols were Sutter's instruments of enforcement. Over the next several years, an impressively self-sufficient community emerged from this modest beginning. There was a blacksmith shop, a carpenter shop, spaces for weavers, coopers, saddlers, shoemakers, and other artisans. Around the settlement, Sutter had walls constructed. The adobe barricade was nearly 18 feet high and more than 2 feet thick, encompassing an area estimated to be about 75,000 square feet. At each end of the enclosure were 2 cannon emplacements in towers. A 2-story adobe command center, covered with gleaming white paint, was centrally located within the compound. The fort provided security for the first inhabitants and a frontier castle for Sutter, imperious master of New Helvetia. On the surface, Sutter's frontier outpost grew into his vision, a personal realm. It featured irrigated fields, orchards, vineyards, sheep, cattle, horses, hogs, and other crops, including a perpetual harvest of enormous debt. It was established as a business and trade center and as a rendezvous point for those who had journeyed over the treacherous Sierra Nevada. Captain Sutter was a trapper, farmer, stockman, merchant, and military ruler. Sutter organized a private army of 200 men, composed of Indians and Europeans. They wore red-trimmed blue and green uniforms and drilled accompanied by fife and drum. Sutter had the authority, mostly self-imposed, to administer justice, prevent and prosecute robberies, and to investigate illegal trapping, hunting, and fishing. Sutter also became known for his brutal control and suppression of the local Indians. There is also evidence that Sutter was involved in sex trafficking. As he recalled in his 1876 personal reminiscences, Sutter said that he was, quote, everything. Patriarch, priest, father, and judge. I had the power of life and death over both Indians and white people, unquote. By 1849, Sutter's dominance in the Sacramento Valley was manifest, and Sutter's Fort was a vibrant symbol of that influence. But this humming beehive of activity would not last long. As the surge of the gold rush pummeled New Helvetia, Sutter's Mexican land grant came under question. Unable to legally prove his title to the satisfaction of the American authorities, his lands came under assault from the arriving Argonauts who swarmed his land. Sutter's territory and property continued to be stripped from his hands. Fields were raided, timber cut, animals stolen. One gold rush butcher is reported to have made $60,000 in 3 months from the sale of Sutter's stolen cattle, an enormous sum even with the inflated prices of the early gold rush. In today's money, that would be about $2 million. Sutter's complaints were either too late or ignored. John Sutter abandoned the fort and moved to other properties on his shrinking domain. Sutter spent the rest of his life attempting and failing to be reimbursed for his losses. In 1880, he died penniless and, as the Romantics noted, heartbroken, in Pennsylvania. His death arrived soon after his last attempt to receive repayment from Congress had failed. By early 1851, Sutter's Fort was a shell. To provide building materials for the booming Sacramento City, the fort walls were plundered for wood and shingles. In March 1851, William Prince visited the site and reported, quote, "The mud walls are crumbling, and in 2 or 3 years will be pretty much demolished. One family occupy a small part of Sutter's old mansion within the fort, and outside 2 or 3 buildings have been erected for a hospital," unquote. In December 1851, George McKinstry sadly described the fort's condition to Edward Kern, the former commander of Sutter's Fort. Quote, "The old fort is fast going to decay. The last time I was there I rode through, and there was not a living thing to be seen. What a fall is there, my fellow." Unquote. All that remained was the 2-story central building, now abandoned and forlorn. As time passed, the white-painted walls flaked and crumbled. While still standing, Sutter's once imposing headquarters was blotchy and resembled a mangy dog. For decades, this last vestige of Sutter's Fort was a deteriorating symbol of the changes wrought by the gold rush, both for Sutter and for old California society. But in 1891, the property was purchased by the native sons of the Golden West, with the goal of rebuilding the fort to approximate its appearance at its height in the mid-1840s. By 1893, the restoration was complete. The revived Sutter's Fort, back from the dead, was donated to the state of California and officially became part of the California State Park System in 1947. This is Sutter's Fort in 1915. Here it is in the 1920s. Note the wisteria vines on the walls. And this is Sutter's Fort today. Sutter's Fort has come to symbolize both renewal and loss. Renewal for its restoration and current vibrancy, hosting many children and groups learning about the early days of California settlement, and loss for what it meant for Sutter, the loss of property, the loss of dignity, and perhaps most importantly, the loss of a literally golden opportunity for one man who had the most to gain from the gold rush.